The paper was still warm from the printer when Ava realized she had signed the wrong line. Not a typo. Not a formatting error. She had placed her signature, neat, deliberate, the kind of signature she had practiced since she was 12, because her mother told her that a woman's name should look like it meant something, directly on the line reserved for the client. On a binding contract, a contract belonging to Shin & Park Holdings, a company whose legal team alone had more people than her entire floor at Mercer Group. She stared at it for 3 full seconds, before the blood drained from her face. "No," she whispered, to no one. The office was empty at 7:14 in the morning. That was usually why she came in early. The quiet, the absence of eyes watching her, the space to breathe without performing competence. Now the quiet felt like it was pressing in on her from every wall. Ava set the folder down on her desk, with the careful precision of someone handling evidence. She sat. She breathed. She picked it up again, as though the second look might show her something different. It didn't. 18 months at Mercer Group. 18 months of arriving early and leaving late, of catching other people's mistakes before they became disasters, of learning the rhythms of this industry. Real estate development, corporate acquisitions, the specific and exhausting language of men who moved money like most people moved furniture. 18 months, and she was 4 weeks away from a promotion that her supervisor, Dennis, had hinted at twice in the last month. "You're indispensable, Ava. You know that." She had nodded and smiled and gone home and let herself believe it for approximately 40 minutes before the doubt settled back in like fog. And now this. She pressed her palm flat against the folder and tried to think. The contract was scheduled to go out by 9. The clients, the actual clients, the representatives of Shin & Park Holdings, were due in the conference room at 10 for the formal review. She had exactly 1 hour and 46 minutes to figure out how to fix this before anyone noticed. Or she had to tell someone, which meant Dennis, which meant the promotion conversation took a very different shape. What she did not know, sitting at her desk with her stomach turning slow circles, was that the contract she had just accidentally signed was the most sensitive document Mercer Group had processed in 4 years. She did not know that the meeting at 10 was not a standard acquisition review. She did not know that the man who would walk into that conference room at precisely 10:02 that morning, not a minute early, never a minute late, was not simply a representative of Shin & Park Holdings. She didn't know any of that yet. She just knew she had made a mistake, and she needed to fix it before the world noticed. Ava spent the next hour on the phone with legal, navigating the kind of bureaucratic patience that made her jaw ache. The woman on the other end, her name was Patricia, and she had the energy of someone who had seen every possible clerical catastrophe and found all of them equally tedious. Walked her through the correction process with the speed of a glacier. You'll need a witness signature on the correction addendum, someone with authority. Not just your direct supervisor. It needs to be department head or above. Dennis is in Chicago until Thursday. Then you'll need to escalate to whoever is acting in his absence. That's Martin Yee, and Martin Yee is in the same building as Dennis because they went to Chicago together for the Belford conference. A pause. Then you may need to flag it directly to the client and request an extension on the review. Ava closed her eyes. The client is Shin & Park. Another pause, longer this time. Oh. Yes. Patricia's voice shifted slightly. Not kinder exactly, but more careful. I'd recommend having someone present when you make that call, just to document the conversation. Ava thanked her and hung up. She sat for a moment with her hands in her lap, looking at nothing in particular. Then she stood, straightened her blazer, gray, structured, the one she wore when she needed to feel put together, and picked up the folder. She was going to have to walk into that conference room and explain the error herself. She decided, somewhere between her desk and the elevator, that she would not apologize excessively. She would state the facts. She would present the correction addendum. She would offer a solution. That was what professionals did. She repeated this to herself in the elevator and in the hallway. and outside the conference room door, where she stood for a moment longer than she meant to because the voices inside had stopped. And that particular quality of silence, sudden, total, like a room holding its breath, made the hair on the back of her neck rise before she even pushed the door open. There were 4 people in the room. 2 she recognized as standard Shinnon Park representatives. She had processed their credentials, knew their names, had emailed both of them twice in the past week about logistics. They sat on the far side of the long table, upright, attentive, with the practiced stillness of people who were accustomed to waiting. A third man stood near the window, large, quiet, hands clasped in front of him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the door she had just come through, and his expression did not change when she entered, which somehow made her more uncomfortable than if it had. The 4th person was sitting at the head of the table. Ava noticed him last, which made no sense given that he was the most visible person in the room. He was young, younger than she had expected, though she hadn't been expecting anyone in particular, dressed in a black suit with the kind of precise tailoring that didn't advertise itself. Dark hair, ink along his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. He had one hand resting on the table, fingers loose, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. Not annoyance, not curiosity, exactly. Something quieter than both. The 2 representatives she recognized shifted almost imperceptibly in their seats. The man by the window went very still. She understood in that moment that she had walked into a room where the atmosphere had already been arranged around this person, like furniture positioned relative to a single fixed point. "Miss," one of the representatives began. "I'm Ava Collins," she said, because starting with her name felt like the most solid ground available. "I'm Mr. Mercer's executive assistant. I need to speak with your delegation about a documentation issue that came to my attention this morning." She set the folder on the table, kept her voice level. "There was an error on the signature page of the preliminary agreement. My signature appears on the client line rather than the administrative witness line. I've already contacted our legal department and prepared a correction addendum, which I can walk you through right now." She looked at the representatives as she said this, because they were the people she had corresponded with, the people she knew how to address. But it was the man at the head of the table who spoke. His voice was low, unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to reach every corner of a room. "You signed it." It wasn't a question. It wasn't quite an accusation either. It sat somewhere between observation and something she couldn't categorize. "By mistake," she said. "Yes." He looked at the folder. Then he looked at her. The expression still hadn't changed. That same quality of attention that felt less like curiosity and more like calculation, slow and thorough. "Sit down, Miss Collins," he said. She had not been invited to sit. She had come in here to deliver information, present a solution, and leave. Every instinct she had pointed toward the door. She sat down. Later she would think about that moment, the way her body had simply responded before her mind caught up. She would think about it for a long time. But sitting there across the table from Gunwoo Shin, with the correction addendum open between them and the city of Chicago 31 floors below the window, Ava had no way of knowing that the mistake she had made that morning was not the beginning of a problem. It was the beginning of everything else. The correction addendum was signed within 20 minutes. It should have taken 5. The process was straightforward. Gunwoo's legal representative reviewed the document, noted the correction, initialed the margin, and slid it across the table for the final countersignature. Standard procedure. Ava had prepared everything correctly, organized the pages in the right order, even tabbed the relevant sections with those small adhesive flags that her supervisor always said were unnecessary, but that she used anyway because they saved time. What took the extra 15 minutes was everything that happened around the paperwork. Gunwoo did not look at the documents immediately. He looked at her first, not in a way she could easily object to. Not a stare that invited confrontation, but with the kind of steady attention that made her aware of every small movement she made. The way she straightened the folder. The way she cleared her throat once, quietly, before explaining the addendum process. The way her hands were perfectly still on the table, because she had learned, years ago, that stillness read as confidence even when it was just controlled anxiety. He watched all of it, and he didn't say anything until she had finished explaining. "You prepared this yourself," he said. Statement, not question. "Yes." "This morning?" "Within the last hour and a half, yes." He looked at the documents then, turned pages slowly, reading rather than scanning. His representatives exchanged a glance she wasn't supposed to notice. She noticed. When everything was signed, and the folder was back in her hands, she stood, thanked the room in general, and walked to the door with the careful steadiness of someone crossing a floor they weren't entirely sure would hold. Miss Collins. She stopped with her hand on the door frame, did not turn around immediately. One breath. "Yes?" "The meeting at 10 proceeds as scheduled. Make sure your department is aware." She turned then. He was already looking back at the documents in front of him. A different set now. The actual agenda materials for the 10 o'clock review. As though her exit required no further acknowledgement. "Of course," she said, and left. In the bathroom down the hall, she stood over the sink and ran cold water over her wrists for 30 seconds. An old trick. Her grandmother had taught her that one. When the world tips sideways, find something cold and real and hold on to it. She looked at herself in the mirror. Brown skin, dark eyes that her mother always said held too much thought. Hair she had straightened this morning because she had a feeling today would require her to look composed. A small gold hoop in each ear, the same pair she wore every day because constance mattered when everything else moved. She looked fine. She looked exactly like a woman who had walked into a difficult situation and handled it professionally. She didn't feel that way yet, but she'd get there. What she could not explain, not to herself, not to anyone, was why the room had felt different with him in it. Not dangerous exactly. More like pressurized. Like the air itself had reorganized around his presence. The way a room changes when a window is opened, and the whole atmosphere shifts direction. She'd met powerful men before. Mercer Group worked with powerful men constantly. She knew how to be professional and invisible in the same moment, which was its own particular skill. This had been different. She couldn't name the difference yet, so she filed it away in the back of her mind where she kept things that required more processing than she currently had time for. She dried her hands, went back to her desk, sent the confirmation email about the 10 o'clock meeting. She did not think about Gunwoo Shin again for the rest of the morning. Or at least, she told herself she didn't. 3 days later, she found out she was pregnant. She was in the Walgreens on Michigan Avenue, standing in the pharmacy aisle at 7:45 in the evening with a basket that contained hand lotion, a box of green tea, and 2 different brands of test, because buying 2 felt more scientific somehow, more like due diligence than panic. The result was not ambiguous. Ava sat on the edge of her bathtub at home and held the test and did not move for a very long time. Outside, the city continued. Sirens, a car horn, someone's music 2 floors up playing something with too much bass. The ordinary sounds of ordinary Tuesday evening in Chicago. None of it touched her. She ran through the timeline the way she had been avoiding running through it all week, since the first sign had appeared, and she'd spent 5 days explaining it away to herself. And the timeline landed, as it always had when she let herself look directly at it, on a specific point. A business trip to New York 8 weeks ago. A rooftop event for one of Mercer's partner firms. Too many people, too much noise, and then a quiet conversation in a corner with a man who introduced himself simply by his last name, Shin, and who had looked at her with that same quality of attention she would not experience again until the conference room 3 days ago. She had not known who he was. That was the truth. and she held on to it. She'd known he worked in acquisitions, that he was connected to a firm her company did business with, that he had a way of listening that made her feel, briefly and dangerously, like the most coherent person in the room. One evening. The kind of mistake that doesn't feel like a mistake until it becomes real. And it was real now. Unmistakably, undeniably real. She set the test down on the edge of the sink and put her face in her hands. She wasn't crying. She was thinking, which for Ava had always looked similar from the outside. She was 29 years old. She was 4 weeks from a promotion. She lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, with a plant she had managed not to kill for 2 years, and a savings account that was healthy but not extraordinary. She had no family in Chicago. Her mother was in Atlanta, her sister in Houston, and the father of her child was, she now understood with a clarity that arrived late and cold, not a mid-level acquisitions professional at a partner firm. He was Gun-Woo Shin. She had watched the receptionist's face change when he walked through the lobby 3 days ago. She had seen how the two representatives sat differently in his presence. She had registered the man stationed near the window. Not a colleague, not an aide, but something else entirely. She had processed all of this intellectually in the conference room and filed it under very important client, handle with care. Only later, when the meeting summary crossed her desk and she saw his full name and title listed at the top of the attendance sheet, had the picture sharpened completely. Gun-Woo Shin, Director of Operations, Shin and Park Holdings, which was the polished surface of something much larger and much darker that the Chicago business community discussed only in careful language and significant pauses. She was not naive. She had grown up in a world that required her to read rooms quickly and accurately. She knew what those pauses meant. She picked up the test again, set it down, stood up. She had decisions to make, and she had learned long ago that the quality of her decisions depended entirely on how clearly she could see her actual situation. Not the situation she wished she were in, not the one she feared, but the true and present one. The true and present situation was this. She was pregnant. She was alone in Chicago. The father was a man with more power than she'd understood when she met him, and he did not know she existed outside of a corrected signature on a contract addendum. That was where she was. That was the ground under her feet. She would figure out what to do with it. She didn't figure it out quickly. The weeks that followed were a careful, quiet negotiation with herself, each morning arriving with the same questions, and each night finding her no further than she'd been. She told no one. She went to work. She smiled at Dennis, who had returned from Chicago, and had, in fact, formally offered her the promotion, Senior Executive Coordinator, effective the 1st of next month. And she had accepted and shaken his hand, and gone back to her desk, and sat very still for a moment before responding to the next email in her queue. She did not reach out to Gun-Woo Shin. She did not know how she would even begin that conversation, and more than that, she did not know what kind of world she would be stepping into if she did. The research she had done, careful, late at night, in the particular way of someone who wanted information, but also wanted plausible deniability about having sought it, told her enough to understand that his world operated by rules she had never needed to know. She was still deliberating, still drafting and discarding opening sentences in her head, when the situation resolved itself in a way she had not anticipated. She was leaving the office on a Thursday evening, crossing the lobby with her bag over one shoulder, and her mind already on the grocery list she needed to get through before 7, when the black SUV parked directly in front of the building's entrance caught her attention. Not because it was unusual for this street, but because the man leaning against it was looking directly at her. Not the large, quiet man from the conference room. A different one. Younger, with close-cropped hair, and a stillness that carried the same quality. Learned, deliberate. "Miss Collins," he said. Not a question. She stopped walking. "Yes." Mr. Shin would like a word. She looked at the SUV. The windows were tinted. She could see nothing through them. She should have said no. Every reasonable, cautious instinct she possessed pointed clearly in that direction. "About what?" she asked instead. The young man's expression didn't shift. He didn't say. Ava adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, looked at the car, looked back at the building she had just left, with its warm lobby lights and the security desk where Marcus was probably watching this exchange through the glass right now. She thought about the conversation she had been trying to find the beginning of for 6 weeks. Maybe this was it. She walked to the car. The interior of the SUV smelled like cedar and cold air. Ava settled into the seat and kept her bag on her lap, which she recognized as a self-protective gesture even as she did it. Something between her body and the rest of the world. The door closed behind her with the solid, pressurized sound of a vehicle that cost more than her annual salary. The city outside became muted, distant, like someone had turned the volume down on everything. Gunwoo was already there. He sat on the opposite side of the rear seat, not directly beside her, with enough space between them to be deliberate. He was in a dark coat this time, the collar turned up slightly. No tie. The tattoos at his neck were visible above his shirt collar, and she found herself registering that detail the way you register something you've already seen once, and filed away more carefully than you meant to. He was looking out the window when she got in. He didn't look at her immediately, which somehow made the silence worse than if he had. The SUV pulled into traffic. Nobody had told her where they were going. She decided not to ask yet. "You've been avoiding a conversation," he said finally. Ava kept her eyes forward. "I don't know what conversation you mean." "Yes, you do." She turned to look at him then, because she refused to be handled like someone who could be maneuvered past their own awareness. He was already looking at her. That same quality of attention, patient, precise, giving nothing away. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Long enough." That landed somewhere uncomfortable. She looked back at the window, at Chicago scrolling past, Michigan Avenue giving way to quieter streets, evening light going orange against the glass towers. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." A silence settled, not hostile. More like two people standing at opposite ends of a bridge, both aware of it, neither moving yet. "I was going to tell you," she said. And then, because partial truths had never sat well with her, "I was trying to figure out how." "I know." She looked at him again. "You know." "You're careful," he said simply. "You needed time to assess the situation before acting. That's not avoidance. That's judgment." He paused. "I respect that." Ava did not know what she had expected him to say, but it wasn't that. She felt something shift slightly in her chest. Not relief exactly, more like the adjustment that happens when you've been holding tension in your shoulders for so long you forget it's there, and then someone points it out, and you become suddenly aware of the weight. "What do you want, Mr. Shin?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the SUV turned, and she recognized the street. They were moving south, toward the river. "I want to handle this correctly," he said. "Define correctly." He looked at her in a way that suggested he was deciding how much to give her at once. It was a careful look, calibrated. She got the impression he did very few things that weren't calibrated. "The child is mine," he said. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise, and I'm not going to leave you to manage this alone. That's not something I'm willing to do." "Nobody asked you to manage anything." "No," he said, "but I'm telling you what I will and won't do regardless." Ava pressed her back against the seat and breathed slowly. The SUV was warm. Too warm, slightly. "You can't just... This isn't a business decision. This is my life, my body, I know whose life it is." The quiet way he said it stopped her. Not because it was dismissive. It wasn't. It was something closer to the opposite. She studied his profile, the clean line of his jaw, the way he held himself with the particular stillness of someone who had trained himself not to move unnecessarily. He was looking out the window again. Somewhere in the city ahead of them, traffic thickened and the driver adjusted course without instruction. "What are you actually proposing?" she asked. He turned to face her fully then, and she understood why the representatives in the conference room had shifted in their seats. His full attention was a physical thing. Not threatening, or not only that. More like standing in direct sunlight after a long time in shade. Clarifying. Inescapable. "Marry me," he said. The city kept moving outside the window. A bus. A delivery truck. 2 people crossing against the light. All of it continuing with complete indifference to the fact that Ava's entire concept of her Thursday evening had just collapsed. She stopped. Started again. "That's not a reasonable thing to say to someone." "It's the most reasonable thing I've said in years. We don't know each other. We know enough. We spent one evening together 8 weeks ago and 3 minutes in a conference room." She could hear herself, the slight elevation in her voice, and she brought it back down deliberately. "That is not a foundation for marriage. It's a foundation for honesty," he said. "Which is more than most people start with." Ava stared at him. She wanted to find the angle, the calculation behind this, the strategic advantage he was extracting. She was good at finding those. She looked and looked, and what she found instead was something she wasn't prepared for, which was that he appeared to mean exactly what he was saying. "I need you to understand something," she said carefully. "I'm not going to be managed. I'm not going to disappear into whatever structure you're proposing and become invisible. I have a job. I have a life here. I have plans." "I know. You keep saying that, because it's true." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. "I'm not asking you to disappear. I'm asking you to let me take responsibility for what is also my responsibility." She looked at her hands on her bag. The gold hoops in her ears caught light from a passing street lamp. She thought about her apartment in Lincoln Park, the plant she hadn't killed, the savings account, the promotion that had just started and that she had worked for quietly and persistently for a 1.5 years. She thought about the fact that she had been lying awake at 3 a.m. for 6 weeks trying to solve an equation alone that apparently had another variable she hadn't accounted for. "I'm not saying yes," she told him. "I know. I'm saying I'll think about it." He nodded once. Small. Like that was all he'd needed. She thought about it for 9 days. In that time, Gunwoo sent no messages, made no calls, sent no intermediaries to her building or her office. The absence of pressure was itself a form of pressure. She was aware of that, aware that a man who understood strategy would know that silence could be more persuasive than pursuit. But knowing it didn't make it less effective, and she found herself thinking about the conversation in the car more than she wanted to admit. On the 4th day, a document arrived at her office by courier. Not flowers, not a card, a document, a legal summary, prepared by a firm she recognized as one of the most reputable in the city, outlining what he was proposing in plain and specific terms. A formal marriage, full legal protections for her, financial, professional, residential. Her job, her name, her autonomy explicitly preserved. Provisions for the child that were detailed and serious. And a clause, written plainly at the bottom of the 3rd page, that she read twice and then sat down and walked away from for 20 minutes before returning to. This agreement is entered into with the genuine intent of both parties. It is not a transaction. The undersigned acknowledges that the terms above are a foundation, not a ceiling. She didn't know exactly what that meant. She knew it meant something. On the 9th day, she called the number that had been printed at the bottom of the document, not his number, the attorney's, and said she had questions. The attorney answered all of them, clearly, without condescension. Ava took notes. On the 10th day, she called Gunwoo directly. He answered on the second ring, which told her he had been expecting her call without making her feel managed by it. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me." She did, 11 of them, which she had written down and numbered because that was how she processed things that mattered. She read them slowly, and he listened without interrupting, and when she finished, there was a brief silence. 9 of those were already in the document, he said. "I know. I needed to say them myself." Another pause. "The other 2? My mother comes to Chicago when the baby is born. She stays as long as she needs to. Of course. And I keep my job. I already agreed to that. I need to hear you say it. You keep your job, Ava." First time he had used her name. It landed differently than she expected. "Whatever you've built, you keep." She looked at the plant on her windowsill. Green, steady, improbably alive. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I'll marry you, Gunwoo." The wedding was quiet. A courthouse on a Friday morning, 2 witnesses, his attorney and a woman from the court's office who smelled like coffee and seemed entirely unbothered by the occasion. Ava wore a cream blouse and her best trousers. Gunwoo wore a dark suit and no expression she could fully read, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he moved through the world, present, watchful, revealing himself slowly and only in fragments. When the judge asked if she agreed, she said yes clearly, the way her mother had taught her to say important things. Walking out of the courthouse into the October air, she understood that she had crossed a threshold she could not uncross. The city looked the same as it always had. Gray sky, a wind off the lake that cut through her coat, pigeons on the steps being entirely indifferent to human drama. Gunwoo walked beside her. Not ahead, beside. A black SUV waited at the curb. Before she reached it, she stopped. "I need you to know something," she said. He stopped too. Looked at her. "I don't know your world," she said. "I know enough about it to understand that it comes with things I've never had to think about before. Rules I don't know. Dangers I can't see yet." She held his gaze. "I'm not afraid of hard things. But I need you to tell me the truth. About what I'm walking into. Not all at once. I understand that's not how this works. But consistently. Over time." He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved between them. "Yes," he said. One word. But the way he said it carried the weight of something he didn't give easily. She nodded and got into the car. The apartment Gunwoo kept in River North was not what Ava had imagined. She wasn't sure what she had imagined exactly. Something colder, maybe. More deliberately impressive. The kind of space that announced its owner's net worth the moment you stepped through the door. All sharp angles and statement furniture chosen by someone paid to make a point. She had steeled herself for that on the drive over, prepared to feel small in a space designed to make people feel small. Instead, it was quiet. High ceilings, yes, and a wall of windows that looked out over the river, the water dark and silver in the late afternoon light. But the rooms were livable. Books on actual shelves, not arranged decoratively but stacked and leaning in the particular disorder of things that got read. A kitchen that showed signs of use. Wooden floors that had developed the faint warmth that only came with time. It felt, unnerving as this was to admit, like somewhere a person actually lived. A woman named Helen, 50s, brisk, with the competent energy of someone who had managed complicated households for a long time, showed Ava to a room that had clearly been prepared recently. Fresh linens, a reading lamp at the right height, a closet that was empty and waiting, a window that faced east, which meant morning light. "Mr. Shin said to tell you the east room gets the best light," Helen said, setting a folded towel on the end of the bed with practiced efficiency. "And that if there's anything you need changed, I should handle it today." Ava set her bag down. "The light is fine." She looked around the room. "Helen, how long have you worked here?" 7 years. "In your experience," Ava said carefully, "what's the most important thing to understand about how this house operates?" Helen regarded her for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating. Then something in her face settled into a kind of respect. "Punctuality," she said. "And honesty. Mr. Shin doesn't tolerate either being wasted." Ava nodded. "Good. Those I can manage." The first 2 weeks were careful. They ate dinner together most evenings. Ava had not expected that, had prepared herself for parallel lives that overlapped only on paper. But Gunwoo came home at 7 most nights, changed out of his work clothes, and appeared in the kitchen or the dining room with the quiet regularity of someone who had decided that shared meals were non-negotiable without ever announcing it. They talked. Not about everything. There were whole territories of his life that remained unaddressed. And she didn't push. Partly because she had said over time and she meant it. And partly because she was still mapping the landscape of who he was in ordinary moments. What she found was unexpected in small ways that accumulated. He read Korean history. He made his own coffee every morning, with a precision that suggested strong feelings about extraction times. He noticed things, not intrusively, but constantly, with a quiet thoroughness that meant nothing in their shared space went unregistered by him. If she moved a glass from one side of the counter to the other, he didn't comment. But the next evening, it would be back where she'd originally put it, which was either considerate or unsettling, and she couldn't decide which. He also, she noticed, never stopped being aware of where she was. Not in a way she could easily object to. He didn't follow her or check on her unnecessarily, but there was a quality to his attention, a steady peripheral awareness, that she felt even when his back was turned. When she came home from work, the quality of the apartment shifted slightly, in a way she couldn't articulate. When she moved through a room, she had the sense of being tracked, not with suspicion, but with something closer to its opposite. She asked Helen about it on a Wednesday afternoon when Gunwoo was out. Helen was in the kitchen, and she answered without turning from the counter. "He's always been like that," she said. "With people he's decided to protect." He decided that quickly. "Yes," Helen agreed. "He usually does." The protection made itself visible for the first time on a Tuesday in November. Ava was at the office. She had gone back to work the Monday after the wedding, as agreed, and had told Dennis only that she had gotten married over the weekend, which Dennis had received with the particular blankness of a man who didn't know how to process information that fell outside expected categories. She was at her desk at 2:30 when her phone buzzed. Not a call. A message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. "Word travels fast in this city, Mrs. Shin. Congratulations on your marriage. I imagine you have no idea what you've walked into. Perhaps we should have coffee and discuss it." No name. No indication of who this was or what they wanted. She stared at it for a moment. Then she forwarded it to Gunwoo's number with no additional comment, because that felt like the most factual thing she could do. His response came in under 4 minutes. "Don't respond. I'll handle it. Are you at the office?" "Yes. Stay there until I send the car." She typed, "I have work until 5. A pause. Then, "The car will be there at 5. Not before. Not come now. Not leave immediately." 5 o'clock, as she'd said, as though her schedule mattered because it did. She sat with that for a moment, then put her phone face down and went back to the quarterly report she'd been reviewing. At 5 o'clock exactly, the car was there. Gunwoo was in it. He didn't explain the message or who had sent it that evening, just told her, briefly and directly, that it had been handled, and that she might receive other approaches of this kind as the news of their marriage spread further, and that the correct response was always to forward without engaging. Who would do that? She asked. He was looking out the window. People who want to know how much you know, or how much you can be used to get to me. The bluntness of it landed cleanly. She appreciated that, had been waiting, actually, for him to start managing her access to information, redirecting her with careful non-answers. Instead, he just said the thing. "And how much do I know?" she asked. He turned to look at her then. "Enough to be a target. Not enough to protect yourself yet." "Then tell me more." Something moved in his expression. Not all at once. "You said that before. I accepted it. But some would be helpful." He studied her for a moment. Then, with the deliberate quality of someone opening a door they usually kept closed, he told her, "Not everything. But enough. The structure of what Shinnon Park actually was beneath its legitimate surface. The alliances and rivalries that governed it. The specific landscape of Chicago, and who in it should concern her." He spoke quietly, without drama, and she listened with the same focus she brought to complex documents. When he finished, the car was pulling up to the building. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, but he didn't move to get out immediately. He was looking at his hands, which was unusual. He almost never looked at his hands. "There's something else," he said. "Tell me." "The information you just heard makes you more visible. To people who don't know how I operate, the assumption will be that my wife knows things, that you're a point of access." He paused. "I want to increase security around you. Discreetly, nothing that will affect your work or make you feel—" "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "You didn't let me finish. You were going to explain the reasoning and then ask. I'm saying yes to the thing you were building toward." She held his gaze. "I'm not going to be difficult about my own safety. Especially not now." His eyes moved briefly, almost involuntarily, to where her hands rested in her lap, and in that moment she understood, with a clarity that arrived quietly and settled deep, that she was not the only one thinking about what "especially not now" meant. He had not forgotten, not for a single moment, that the person sitting next to him was carrying a child. His child. He looked back at the window. "All right," he said. One word, low and final, like something decided. December arrived, and with it, the first real test of what they were building. It came in the form of a man named Richard Hale, a business associate of Gunwoo's, or rather, a man who occupied the gray region between associate and rival. The kind of ambiguous alliance that characterized much of the world Ava was slowly learning to read. Hale was hosting a dinner, and Gunwoo was expected to attend. He told Ava about it 3 days in advance, which she had come to understand was his way of giving her genuine choice rather than obligation. "You don't have to come," he said. "These events aren't comfortable. Will it look strange if I don't?" He considered this with the honesty she had come to rely on. "Yes." "Then I'll come." She watched something move through his expression that wasn't quite relief. It was more contained than relief. More quiet. The way he said "all right" afterward was the same low, settled sound as before, and she filed that away with the other small things she had been collecting. The dinner was at a private room in a restaurant in the Gold Coast. 20 people, dark wood, candlelight that made everything look considered. Ava wore a deep burgundy dress and her gold hoops, and moved through the room with the same skill she brought to professional settings, finding conversational footing quickly, listening more than she spoke, reading people with the ease of someone who had done it her whole life. She became aware, somewhere between the first and second course, that Gunwoo was tracking her position across the room. Not nervously. Not with the tense vigilance of someone expecting danger. With the same steady peripheral attention she had noticed at home. But here it was visible. Because here there were other people to observe by comparison. Everyone else looked at the person directly in front of them. Gunwoo looked at whoever was speaking to him, and at the same moment, somewhere slightly beyond them. She also became aware of Richard Hale. He was charming in the particular way of men who practiced it. Smooth, attentive, remembering details she'd mentioned exactly once, and deploying them later with the precision of someone who understood that feeling seen was its own form of influence. He brought her a drink she hadn't asked for. He asked about her work with a quality of interest that felt 3 degrees too warm. She kept her responses pleasant and brief. She was good at this. The specific art of being friendly while giving nothing away. After dinner, when people were moving into the adjoining lounge, Hale touched her elbow to redirect her toward a quieter corner of the room. She didn't hear Gunwoo move. She didn't see him cross the room. One moment there was a hand on her elbow, and the next moment Gunwoo was simply there, standing close enough that the touch became unnecessary, present in a way that required no words and no raised voice and no explanation. Hale stepped back, just slightly, just enough. Gunwoo glanced at him once, with an expression that communicated something Ava couldn't fully translate but that Hale clearly received without difficulty. Then Gunwoo's attention returned to her entirely, and he said very quietly, "Helen called. She wants to know if you need anything before tomorrow's appointment." It was a completely ordinary sentence. It also meant, "I'm here. This conversation is over." She understood both things simultaneously. "I'll call her in the morning," she said, matching his quiet register exactly. Hale excused himself with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and walked away, and Gunwoo remained where he was, not touching her, but close enough that the rest of the room seemed to understand something had been settled. Later, in the car home, she didn't mention it directly, but she said, looking at the river as they crossed the bridge, "He wasn't going to do anything in a room full of people." "No," Gunwoo agreed, "but you weren't going to let it continue either." A pause. "No." She nodded slowly. Outside, Chicago glittered cold and indifferent along the water. "Thank you," she said. He said nothing, but something in the line of his shoulders, the way he let out one slow and quiet breath, told her that he had been holding that tighter than she realized. The baby came on a Thursday in February, at 4:47 in the morning, in a delivery room at Northwestern Memorial that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and the particular quality of fluorescent light that exists nowhere else in the world. Ava's mother, Diane, had been in Chicago for 3 weeks by then, had arrived in late January with 2 suitcases, a box of her own kitchen things because she didn't trust other people's pots, and the immediate, unspoken assessment of Gunwoo that Ava had been dreading and couldn't avoid. Diane was a woman who formed opinions quickly and held them carefully, and rarely changed them without significant cause. She had raised 2 daughters alone, after Ava's father left when Ava was 9, and she had developed over those years a precision radar for men who presented well and meant little. She had watched Gunwoo across the dinner table on her first evening in Chicago, with the focused quietness of someone reading fine print. He had not tried to charm her, had not performed warmth or deployed the social fluency Ava had watched him use when he needed to. He had been simply, plainly himself, present, attentive to Ava in the way that had become ordinary to Ava, but was apparently visible to someone encountering it fresh, because Diane's expression had shifted somewhere around the second course into something Ava couldn't immediately read. Later, when Gunwoo had excused himself to take a call, Diane had looked at her daughter across the table and said, "He watches you like you might disappear." "I know," Ava said. "That can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on the man." "I know that too." Her mother had picked up her fork. "So far it looks like the first kind." That was all she said. For Diane, it was an endorsement. In the delivery room, Gunwoo sat in a chair pulled close to the bed, and he did not leave it. That was the thing Ava would remember most clearly afterward, when the whole night blurred into a series of sensory fragments. The chair, and the fact that he stayed in it. Through the hours of early labor, through the escalating intensity of it, through the moment when everything narrowed to a single urgent point and the room filled with measured voices and movement. He was there. Not pacing, not checking his phone, not doing the restless things people did when they couldn't handle staying still. He was just there, and his hand was where she could reach it. And when she did reach it, he held on with a steadiness that had nothing performative about it. She didn't say anything to him through most of it. Neither did he. There was nothing to say. It was the most honest they had ever been with each other, and it happened without any words at all. The baby arrived, and the sound she made, that first indignant, astonishing sound, did something to the room that Ava felt in her chest like a key turning. Gunwoo stood up from the chair. She saw his face then, in the moment before he controlled it, before the habitual containment reasserted itself. For approximately 4 seconds, she saw him without any of his careful architecture. He looked at the baby the way people looked at things they had not known they were waiting for until the moment arrived. She looked away to give him that. It felt private in a way she wanted to protect. They named her Mia. It had been Ava's suggestion, offered quietly one evening in December when they had talked, carefully and practically, about names. Gunwoo had considered it in the way he considered most things, without rushing, and then said yes with the same low simplicity that she had learned meant something he actually meant. Mia Shin, written on the form in the hospital's careful type, next to both their names. She was home for 6 weeks before she went back to work, and those 6 weeks rearranged things she hadn't expected to be rearranged. It wasn't dramatic. Life with a newborn wasn't dramatic in the cinematic sense. It was exhausting and immediate and granular, all small urgent needs and disrupted sleep and the strange compressed intimacy of 2 people navigating the same tiny, demanding person. What she hadn't anticipated was how much she would learn about Gunwoo in that context. Not the version of him that operated in conference rooms and made decisions that moved money and people across the city. The version that was up at 3 a.m, because she was, sitting in the chair by the window with Mia against his chest, in a silence so complete it had its own texture. She found him like that on a night in late February. She had woken at 2:30 and gone to check, out of habit, and the room was dim and quiet and he was there. He didn't hear her in the doorway. She stood there for a moment longer than she meant to, watching him in the gray light, his jaw resting lightly on top of Mia's head, his eyes closed but not fully. The particular half-alertness of someone who never fully stood down. She must have made some sound, because he looked up. She leaned against the doorframe. "You have a 7 o'clock. I know. You should sleep." He looked back down at Mia. She was restless. "She's not anymore." He was quiet. Then, "I know." He wasn't in a hurry to put her down. Ava could see that clearly. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the small armchair beside his, close enough that their silence felt shared rather than parallel. "Gunwoo." He looked at her. "I need to tell you something." She had been constructing this for a while, not the words exactly, but the decision to say it. "When I married you, I thought I was making a practical choice, a responsible one, for her." She looked at Mia. "I told myself that was all it was." He didn't respond immediately, waited for the rest. "I was wrong about that," she said. "Or, not wrong, incomplete." She found his eyes in the low light. "Somewhere in the last 4 months, I stopped calculating and started just living here, with you. And I needed you to know that, because you've been honest with me from the beginning, and I want to return that." The room was very still. Gunwoo looked at her for a long moment. The guard that was usually somewhere in his expression, not unfriendly but present, it was simply gone. She wasn't sure when that had happened. Maybe it had been happening gradually for months, the way daylight increased in winter, too slowly to notice until one morning the room was just brighter. "Ava, he said, quiet. Her name and his voice carrying something she had not heard clearly before because she hadn't been listening for it. I knew what I wanted the morning you walked into that conference room and took responsibility for a mistake without flinching. I didn't know what to do with it. He stopped. Started again, more carefully. I've been trying not to move too fast. Give you room. She thought about the 9 days of silence, the document with 12 pages of terms, and one sentence at the bottom about ceilings, the way he said all right when she agreed to things, as though each small yes was something he held on to. You've been remarkably patient, she said. Something crossed his face that was almost a smile. Don't tell anyone. It would ruin my reputation. She laughed, short, genuine, surprised out of her. Mia stirred slightly, and they both went still and watchful until she settled again. When Ava looked back at him, he was watching her with that expression she had learned to read, finally, after 4 months of study. Not calculation, not strategy, just attention, the real kind, the kind that costs something. I'm not going anywhere, she said, and meant it in every possible sense. He reached over, without any particular ceremony, and covered her hand with his. Not tightly, just resting. A point of contact, simple and warm. They stayed like that until Mia's breathing went deep and even, and the city outside began its first gray suggestions of morning. Spring came the way it always did in Chicago, slowly, then suddenly, with the particular shock of warmth after a long gray season. Ava went back to work in March and found it was the same desk, the same work, the same Dennis with the same coffee that was always slightly too strong. And also different, in the way things are different once you've been away and returned. You see the shape of it more clearly. What mattered, what didn't. She was good at her job. That hadn't changed. The promotion had moved her into a role with more autonomy and more responsibility, and she found she had more capacity for both than she'd expected, not because her life had gotten simpler, but because something in her had organized itself more clearly. She knew what she was doing, and why, and for whom. That kind of clarity was useful. Gunwoo handled the security concerns with the same controlled precision he brought to everything. The approach from Richard Hale, who had, in the month since the dinner, made 2 more indirect attempts to establish points of leverage, was addressed with the kind of finality that required no explanation. Ava didn't know the details. She knew the outcome, which was that the contact stopped, and that Gunwoo told her about it directly and immediately, as he had promised he would. That was the agreement. He kept it. She learned his world incrementally, the way he had said she would, not all at once, not with a single revelation, but in layers. She learned which of his associates were genuinely trusted and which were managed carefully. She learned the pressure points and the alliances and the particular rules of the structure he operated within. She asked questions when she had them, and he answered with the same directness she had asked for in the courthouse parking lot on the morning of their wedding. It was not a simple life. She had not expected it to be. But there was something in the difficulty of it that felt earned in a way that easy things didn't. On a Saturday in April, Ava was in the kitchen when Gunwoo came in from the building's fitness room, Mia in one arm. He had developed the habit of taking her on his morning routine, a fact that Helen found efficient, and Diane on a video call had found deeply amusing, and a coffee in his other hand that he set on the counter near where Ava was standing. Helen's off today, he said. I know. I was going to make something. I'll cook. She looked at him. You cook? He set Mia down in the small portable seat on the counter and turned to the cabinet with the same deliberate competence he brought to most things. I've been cooking since I was 17. You've been hiding that. Nobody asked. She leaned against the counter and watched him move through the kitchen with the ease of someone who knew where everything was and how everything worked, and thought about the version of him she had assembled in her mind from observation and conversation and the small accumulating evidence of shared daily life. It was a complicated picture. Probably not complete. Probably wouldn't be for a long time. And that was all right. Complete pictures of people were rarer than most claimed anyway. Mia made a sound of strong opinion about something invisible. Gunwoo glanced at her with an expression that, at the beginning, Ava would not have predicted he was capable of, that specific softness that appeared only in the presence of one particular 12-week-old person and nowhere else in his observable life. Ava picked Mia up and swayed slightly. The way she'd learned settled her, and Mia quieted and grabbed Ava's finger with her whole fist and held on with the absolute conviction of someone who has found the one solid thing in an uncertain world. Gunwoo was watching them. She felt it before she turned to confirm it. That peripheral attention, constant and warm. She met his eyes across the kitchen. There was no grand declaration in the look, no performed moment. Just two people in a kitchen on a Saturday morning with a baby between them and coffee getting warm on the counter and the whole complicated, specific shape of their life arranged around them like something that had been built carefully and would hold. "Eggs?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Please." He turned back to the stove, and she held Mia. And outside the window the city was beginning its morning, ordinary and ongoing and completely indifferent, as it had always been, to the quiet, remarkable fact of people finding their way to each other through unlikely and imperfect paths. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything.